Hi, this is Block 3, Progressives in Power, Section 1, Roots of Progressivism, with the one starting with the American Federation of Labor, the AFL. The 1880s and 1890s were kind of the point at which the American labor movement really took off. The American labor movement started after the Civil War and had to win the legal right to even to form. It was determined that the Constitution did afford workers the right to form a labor union in the years after the Civil War, and the American Federation of Labor soon became the largest of American labor unions. It began in 1886, and soon it had over 140,000 members. And that grew to over 2.5 million by the time the United States got involved in the First World War. It was not a union of any one particular industry. It was a combination of all different unions. There was steelworker unions and electrical worker unions and carpentry unions, and they all got together under the banner of the American Federation of Labor. It was a moderate group led by this guy, Samuel Gompers. Samuel Gompers is kind of he's not the father of the American labor movement, but he's certainly he's the most important person in its history. He was the one who came up with the idea to combine all these different labor unions into the American Federation of Labor. And he fought for the right of collective bargaining. What collective bargaining is, basically, is instead of a company negotiating with each individual worker on a case-by-case basis, the company negotiates with one person that represents the workers collectively. And for a long time it was Samuel Gompers. Samuel Gompers, the workers would vote to make Samuel Gompers their representative to bargain collectively in their name. Samuel Gompers would sit across from the business owners, and they would negotiate out wages and hours and working conditions and all things like that. Gompers and the AFL are moderate labor. Gompers and the AFL are both moderate people. They are not revolutionaries. They're not socialists. Samuel Gompers disliked radical socialism just as much as he disliked the excesses of big business. Samuel Gompers believed passionately in just negotiation. He believed that business owners and workers, capital and labor, could work together to benefit everybody. And he always threatened kind of big business by saying, look, I'm the best you're going to get. If you won't listen to me, my workers will join more radical unions, and they might, start to argue for socialism or, God forbid, even communism. So he was someone with which the owners could work with. They didn't like working with him. They thought still that unions were illegal. The most big businessmen believed that collective bargaining was illegal, but they also recognized Samuel Gompers' general reasonability, and most of the gains that were made by workers during the Progressive Era were made through these negotiations. Were they always peaceful? No. Were there lots of strikes? Yes. But the United States, unlike Europe, never developed a radical socialist movement, and much at all, and never a communist movement. And that has to be chalked up to Samuel Gompers. His reasonability and his belief in forthright negotiation between business owners and labor kind of helped that along. He was a big believer in collective bargaining, and he was also a believer in strikes when necessary. Eugene V. Debs, get a picture of him up here. Eugene Debs is kind of the hero of the more radical. I need a bigger picture than that. Eugene Debs is kind of the leader of the more radical workers. He was a socialist. He believed that the big companies should be broken up and their assets be given equally to all the workers. He was the head at first of the American Railway Union and voted to aid workers in this Pullman strike. He was thrown in jail for 6 months after the strike for violating a court order. And this made him a hero amongst the more radical labor people, among the more radical workers. He became a national figure on the left, and he was America's leading socialist. He was very urbane, well-spoken. He argued his points passionately and very, very well. He ran for president several times as a socialist, and he peaked at earning 6% of the vote in 1912. The fact that Eugene Debs, the head of American Socialists, peaked at 6% speaks to the fact that most American workers preferred Samuel Gompers's style to Eugene Debs's style. They believed more in moderation. They did not want to take the business owners' businesses away from them. Eugene Debs kind of got the headlines. Eugene Debs, when violence happened, he was often, associated with it. But Sam Gompers kind of got more accomplished. Then there was an even more radical union leader, and that was Daniel De Leon. And Daniel De Leon, that's an E, was the head of the International Workers of the World, the IWW, and they were sometimes abbreviated to the Wobblies. They are communists. Radical socialist communists. I guess this is as big as we're going to get. Here's Daniel De Leon, there he is. He did not like progressives or populists because they believed in free enterprise. They believed in a capitalist system just kind of restrained by labor. Daniel De Leon and his International Workers of the World, the Wobblies, were a militant radical group who called for the abolition of private property. The Wobblies believed that all property should be taken away from its owners and owned collectively by the workers. They favored communism, opposed free enterprise. Obviously, they are disliked by big business, but they're also disliked by moderate labor leaders like Samuel Gompers. Daniel De Leon and the Wobblies were a powerful force in Europe, but never in the United States. What they were used for more in the United States was kind of a foil. They were used as a foil by big business, freaking out the American middle class that if these labor union people get power, this is what's going to happen. We're going to go to communism and godless communism, and people be taking your wealth away from you. They were also used by moderate labor leaders like Samuel Gompers, telling the industrialists, look, if you don't negotiate with us, if you don't make us happy in our moderation, our workers, our people will go over to someone like Eugene Debs or even over to someone like Daniel De Leon with the Wobblies. So if you want to think of kind of there's the moderate labor led by Samuel Gompers, kind of the left-wing labor led by Eugene Debs and the socialists. They did not. They believed in workers owning the factories, not the factory owners. And then you go even further to the left with someone like Daniel De Leon and the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World, believed in communism, an abolition of private property entirely, a revolution of the workers to control the means of production. So there's your three: Gompers, Debs, De Leon. Keep them straight. The next question we want to ask is, how did these labor leaders get what they wanted in the run-up to the progressive movement? Well, the first thing, the most obvious, is a strike. Okay? If the workers refuse to work, the capitalists don't make any money. If the workers don't work, then the factory owners don't make any money. And let's have 18... And a strike back in the 1890s looked pretty much the same as a strike does now. Here's a picture of workers on strike in Great Britain. The workers would simply refuse to show up to work. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is Bethlehem Steel in San Francisco. The workers would refuse to go to work. The owners don't make any money, and of course that became a test of wills. Will the owners give in after losing so much money, or will the owners hang on long enough and labor has to give in because they all of a sudden don't have enough food to eat? So a strike is the most obvious, most effective way for a union to get its demands met. Workers stop working until the demands are met. It can be a very effective form of attack if the union is united and the members have saved up enough money to survive not working. Remember, there's no welfare checks. So if you're on strike, you have to have saved up enough money to survive the strike. And if it started lasting a long time, workers started saying, look, we need money and we have to go back to work whether our demands have been met or not. The main weapon so the strike is the main weapon of the working class. An injunction is sort of the main weapon, or one of the weapons, of capital, of the businessmen. And what an injunction is a judicial order, an order from a judge saying you may not strike. It is illegal. If you strike at this point, you can be put in jail. Injunctions were passed by judges sympathetic to the demands or to the wants of the business owners of capital. So, for example, there was a famous strike by the police officers in Boston, and a judge issued an injunction saying police officers are not allowed to strike. Period. End of story. You must go back to work or you'll face legal sanction. That's an injunction. Another method that labor used was the boycott. If a company was locking its workers out or was not giving in to the demands of its workers, then nationally the labor movement might demand a boycott. And obviously the best place to hurt a big business is in its pocketbook. So if enough working people or enough people sympathetic with the workers refuse to buy the products of this business, that would force the business to the negotiating table also. Another method that labor used was called a closed shop. A closed shop says, in this business, the only people who may be hired are members of the union. So if we had a shoe factory, everybody who worked in the shoe factory as a condition of their employment had to join the union. That's a closed shop. What that does is if the union is on strike, everybody's out of the factory, not just some of the people. It's used by the unions to protect their workers from cheap labor. So if they had an agreement that the shoe factory was a closed shop and they went out on strike, the owners were not allowed to hire cheaper labor. They are not allowed, and it was also when they weren't on strike. Union members had to be paid more. That was some of the demands that they had won. A closed shop means that everyone in the factory must be a member of the union. And that was a big success of the labor movement. Back to the other side, the blacklist. A blacklist is let's take that same shoe factory. Before that shoe factory was unionized, kind of the workers saying, let's make a union, let's make a union, let's make a union, those were probably not very popular workers with the ownership. And the ownership might fire them and then let all of the other owners in the area or in the country, if they were big enough, no, don't hire Fred Jones. Fred Jones is a radical, socialist. He's going to try to create a union at your factory. So then when Fred Jones came to get a job at a factory in another town, there'd be a list of people. Do not hire this person. That's the blacklist. And very often, in an attempt to prevent their workforces from unionizing, businessmen made their workers sign what were called yellow dog contracts. And all a yellow dog contract is, it's a written agreement of employment saying that they will not join a union while working for the company. And then if they joined a union, that was grounds to be fired. So let's look at these different 6 things again, and divide them up between weapons of capital and weapons of labor. Weapons of capital included injunctions, the blacklist, and yellow dog contracts, in order to prevent workers from organizing and getting what they wanted. Again, an injunction is a judicial order. A blacklist is a list of kind of people who create problems in a factory by trying to unionize it. And a yellow dog contract is a contract that says, while you're working for this shoe company, you may not join a union, and if you do, you will be fired. Weapons of the working class in this conflict then were boycotting the company's goods, a strike. Very often workers struck to get their union recognized. And then after, if they had won the battle and the company agreed to recognize the union, one thing that they would demand would be a closed shop. That was kind of the final victory for many of these workers in the early progressive era, that only union people could be employed in the factory. This was how the moderate labor leader Samuel Gompers operated. First through boycotts, threats of strikes, and then a closed shop environment for his workers to get the best deal possible. Some of the things that Samuel Gompers and the workers were arguing for throughout this entire thing: 8-hour workdays, only 5 days of work and not 6. Disability, if you got hurt, the company would help you pay your bills. Things like that. But mostly the 8-hour workday and the 40-hour work week was what men like Samuel Gompers tried to negotiate out of business.